Hi, thanks for tuning in to Goop Book Club today. Only had a few technical issues so far, so I'm sure this live was going to go off without a hitch. If you have been following along with Goop Book Club for a while, thank you so much. And if you're new, welcome. Every month we pick a new book to read. We talk about it together. We have small Zooms with our book club members. And then my favorite part, I get to show up here at the end and talk with our authors live. As a reminder, you can always find the latest, what we're reading, at goop.com/goopbookclub. And as always, at the end of this chat, I'll be announcing our next read, which I'm super excited about. So as you know, this month we have been reading The Ensemble by Aja Gabel. And this is one of my favorite novels ever. The editor of this book, Laura, is an old friend of mine from publishing, and she publishes the best books, and she sent it to me before it came out. I read it a few years ago, and I had been wanting to read it again for Goop Book Club. And I was at a friend's house recently, and I was telling her how I was going to reread it for book club, and I saw this copy sitting on her shelf, and we pulled it down, and she flipped through the book for about like a minute, and she told me, this is actually my friend walking in right now because I thought my computer was broken. And she was telling me about this passage that had changed her life. And when she read it, it gave me chills because it was a passage that I had remembered and that had really shaped me, and something that stuck with me, which is all to say, this is a book that I think makes you deeply feel things. And I'm so grateful for Aja for writing about it, for writing a book about four friends, and really, making us all feel things. So without further ado, Aja, welcome to the screen and to Goop Book Club.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Hi, thanks for being here. I feel like part of me is disappointed because you're in LA and I always wanted to meet you in person, but I'm excited that we get to have this virtual moment.
Yeah, if you don't mind me telling me, what was the passage that your friend was referring to? I'm dying to know.
Okay, so it was on this is in the paperback for anyone who's following along. Let me pull it up. So it's 217, and it's talking about Brit. Do you mind if I read it?
I don't mind at all.
Okay. So this is when Brit is kind of looking back on her relationship with Paul, and I think they've been together for about a decade at this point. She goes, and now she was nearly 40, and it was about time she admitted that the life she was living was actually her life, not some precursor to her life, and that the reason she wasn't living another, perhaps better life, was that she'd met someone decent with whom she'd had something very important in common, a desire to be in love.
Wow, that's so nice. Oh, I'm so glad. Okay.
And I think why we both love that passage, and there were so many moments in the book that held this deep sense of nostalgia, and I think a lot of the characters were navigating all of these different people that they were and were in the past and thought they maybe could have been in this future, and this idea that you could long for these other lives, but at a certain point you were one person and you were living one life and one person in that moment, and how one moment in oneself could contain all of these past selves and all of these people that you would never even be, and how the characters all kind of navigated that.
Yeah, that's a really succinct boiling down of what really unlocked the book for me when I was writing it, which was this idea that we would be able to write about a lot of time, and I would be able to write, and we would be able to read and cover a lot of time, because I wanted to speak to that. I wanted to speak to the ways that you change and grow, and how you can almost kind of miss this version of yourself that you used to be, and that it would be not just a moment in time, but that it would be a life. Like I wanted to write about a life and the life of this friendship, and I needed to cover so much time to be able to do that. So once I realized that was what I was writing about, it was like clear to me what the book could be.
Yeah, and I like that you said that about the passage of time. That was something we talked about in our Zoom the other day with book club members. Is like, on the one hand, obviously is such a character-driven book, and the events of the book could have been completely different. And I think the novel, the story would have held, because there's so much about the characters and about the passage of time, how they had changed. And I loved Henry at the end, you know, sort of became obsessed in a way with how he had changed and if he had not changed and how other people perceived that. But I thought this passage in particular, the one that I just read, was also an interesting way of, you know, it's funny in life, like it's like you blink and 10 years pass, like a relationship matures, and it's sometimes in real life you're like, wow, how did that happen? And it's like time passes, and I think you did such a beautiful job of showing that how time passed differently for each of these characters, and how they kind of dealt with it and navigated it and even perceived time differently.
Yeah, this is interesting because the original title for the book was not a good title, but it was called In Common Time, which common time is 4/4, and so that was very much, you know, it's not a good title. This title's better, I think, but it was very much top of mind to think about that as part of what binds us together and tears us apart a little bit, is how you can think about time differently or experience it differently. And also this idea that, you know, it could be like that passage you're talking about. Britt is in this relationship for a very long time and is realizing that maybe it's not the one for her. But that also that's okay, you know, that like you spend time doing things that maybe aren't the things you're going to end up doing for the rest of your life, but that's also okay. And you can move on from that. And I think that was something that I was sort of trying to tell myself, you know, that's something I felt like I needed to hear, that there was permission to like move on from something, and also to say that was valuable.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite moments towards the end of the book with Jana and Kimiko, where Kimiko is kind of struggling with the path that she's chosen, and in whether that is a path she's chosen or one that was kind of laid out for her. And I think Jana says something to her like, it's okay to be nostalgic for a way of life, or I'm nostalgic for that way of life, but not for the actual life. And she says to her, you know, it's okay to long for something else. It doesn't mean that you need that something else. And I thought the way she gave permission and the way she articulated that, that really resonated for me.
Oh, that's so nice to hear, because these are passages that, you know, it's so great to talk to a book club, first of all, because you've read the book already and we're allowed to talk about those end moments. And usually I think when I talk about the book, it's to people who maybe haven't read it yet, or we want to be cautious of that. And, you know, I won't, you know, it's not a spoiler heavy book in that sense, but what you're talking about is it's like the whole reason you write a book is so you can get to that ending, and give the characters these moments that help them make sense of everything that's passed. And that's really, that moment with Jana and Kimiko was really important to me, because it felt like they were both these women who had maybe sacrificed a lot to be able to do the things that they wanted to do in their careers, or they wanted to do in their family. And I wanted them to be able to connect in that way over that. And like, they had to go through all of the life first to be able to connect. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you recognized that part.
How did you decide? Did you always know that Kimiko was going to become this voice at the end with her own chapter? Like, how did you decide to do that? Because I thought it just worked so well, but it was tricky because you were introducing, she was a piece of the ensemble in a way, but not in the same way as the other characters, and that you gave her that weight at the end, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it comes from the difficulty in understanding Henry's arc. That came last for me, because he's not a classic novel character in that he's someone for whom things come very easily. Like, he has a good family, he has money, He has unimpeachable talent. He's friendly. He's like a little bit of a boy, but like that's fine in this world because people will give you lots of leeway if you're just a charming boy. And by boy, I mean he's not necessarily maturing at the rate that he should be. And so it was hard for me to realize like, oh, what's Henry's like deal? Like you need a character in a novel who's going to grow and have conflict and obstacles. And it wasn't until I realized like, oh, his obstacle is that he maybe didn't get to choose his life, that it was sort of given to him. And the person who can alter that is this person that he's entered into another union with. So he's kind of the only one in the book who has an outside family. The only one in the ensemble who has an outside family. And the more I wrote him, the more I realized we need to hear from her because she is proximal to this center family. She's like an in-law of the family that I'm writing about. And we need to hear from her because she's the one who's going to change Henry's story. She's going to change his arc. And once I realized that, it was so exciting, after pages and pages of writing about these 4 people to think like, oh, I can go and I can do whatever I want. I'm writing this. I can go into whoever's perspective that I want. And it was really like a nice way to sort of let the air out of the pressure, of the claustrophobia of it all.
Yeah, and I thought there was that really amazing, one of the relationships I loved towards the end was with Daniel and Henry and how their relationship changed. And they had that moment where I think Henry says to Daniel something like, isn't it terrible to get everything you wanted? And it shows how far they've both come in understanding their lives, because Daniel in the past would have like snapped at him, and Daniel's thinking to himself, no, it's terrible to not to know what to want. And it was interesting how they both had these curved paths, but they came to this kind of, it was just interesting seeing their arcs grow together. And Daniel, for me, I think was the character to kind of like switch tracks when I read it the second time, who I felt like I really understood more. You have there's this long Daniel section and things in the middle of the book, maybe around like part 3. And we were talking about our Zoom yesterday, like a bunch of us were like, oh, Daniel, like you really get kind of frustrated with him in that middle section because he's just like so in his own way. But for me, he was a character similar to Henry, but maybe even more so the second time I read it. I don't know if redeemed himself is the right word in my eyes, but it just showed how much he had learned and grown in his relationship with Britt. And I loved, there's the moment where he's hesitating and he's thinking about coming back to her and opening up and being vulnerable to her. And he says it's the first time he doesn't know how she's going to react. And he says something like, he was afraid that not having the surprise, not having it be something new would take away from the moment. But it's like the familiarity and all of the selves they were before, like adds to it. So I don't know if you could speak a little bit like about Daniel. I just think it's interesting. In the beginning, I was like, the first time I read it, I really felt like, to me, Jonna and Henry were like the main characters, and I was like obsessed with them getting together. I was like, oh my God, they have to like have sex. Like they have to
oh
like get together.
God.
Daniel and Britt became these like, I don't know, I felt like I learned so much from them in the end.
That's so interesting, that the way that it changed for you. That's so interesting to hear. For me, it was always Britt and Daniel at the start. That's what I initially wanted to write about, was this love story where, Britt would be pining for somebody and then have her heart broken by somebody that she had to see every day for years on end because they were building something bigger together, and how that would work and what you would make of that, and how you would come together again years and years later. That was the love story I initially wanted to write. And then it evolved into sort of, thinking about a different kind of love that Jana and Daniel have. I mean, Jana and Henry have, which is sort of a love of each other's talent and a love of of each other's ease in different ways. It was like more of an interesting platonic love that I got to write about there. But the romantic love between Britt and Daniel was really what I was trying to explore. And it's funny because I hear that a lot about Daniel, where people say, can't you just do the right thing? And I feel that too. But when people ask, who are you most like, I always think that I'm most like Daniel, because he does get in his own way, and he wishes he was better than he is, but he doesn't know how to get there. And that's something that I identify with. And I think like ultimately a lot of people probably do, is like, I can see the person that I could be, and I just don't know how to get there. And he doesn't see that like there's the love of this woman who could like easily get him there, because she's a good person and sees the good in him. But he has to see that for himself. And it takes him a really, really long time. And so that's kind of how I think about how Daniel works in the book. And why it ends up being his story is because it not ends up being his story, but like it ends with him. Like we end on Daniel's voice, because he is the one who has the most to learn. It takes him the longest.
And I think too, to go back to what you were saying about creating this dynamic where as a reader, we're kind of studying what are these characters getting out of this ensemble, this friendship, this group. And I think Daniel, there's this moment where you write something like he didn't realize the ways he was being fulfilled from the group that someone else might get from a romantic or an intimate partnership, that he had this stability, this intellectual, he was pushed by these people and all these things that the group gave each other that kind of fill these other gaps in their lives. And then I think the music added a whole nother level to it. And that was fascinating to me. I was talking about this yesterday. I played sports growing up, and it really reminded me a lot of, I played soccer in college, and there was 8 of us in my year, and people used to joke, we're all a little strange, and people used to joke, like if you put the 8 of you together, you would make one complete person who would make sense. And that struck me while I was reading, because the music, I wasn't familiar with this world at all, but it was so physical and so intimate, and you did such a good job of showing that throughout. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about your own musical background and how you kind of conceived of this metaphor that ran throughout.
Yeah, thanks. I played, I've been playing since I was 5. So I started to play the violin when I was 5 on Suzuki method, and then switched to cello when I was 10, and then kept playing cello well into college and after. And I played really seriously and competitively for a long time, but it wasn't ever something I merged with writing. Like it was a separate sort of art for me. And it was only when I would try to explain to people this part of me, like, oh, I also play the cello, and what I mostly did was play in quartets, and I know classical music isn't cool. Like you don't want to come to this concert, or you don't want to listen to it. It was only when I really, as an adult, started to try to explain to other people and then to myself what was interesting about that to me, and what was important about that to me was that it was this way to connect and communicate with these friends that I had that was special and different. And I think you have that in every friend group. You have a shorthand, or you have a way that you communicate with them that's different in the way you might communicate with other people. But the fact that it was through this music that was so physical and so intimate and nonverbal and esoteric, ancient, old, opens these pathways to being closer to people in a different way. And that's kind of where it sparked for me, like, oh, this is a thing that, like, this is a kind of a relationship that must be so difficult if you're doing it professionally to weather if you are a person who has personal drama with anyone else in the group. And so once I started thinking about that, then I was like, oh, this is absolutely what I have to write about.
Yeah, those were two of the things that surprised me the most. Like, one, the physicality of it, and just like how it shaped their bodies. Like, you talk about with Britt, like the mark that she had, like Daniel with the cello, and how physical it was. Henry's obviously like injury towards the end. And I thought there was that great moment when Daniel chips his tooth and Britt just on instinct goes and like picks it up and puts it in his mouth. And that's the thing that Paul, her current boyfriend, like loses his mind over, because that it is so intimate. And there's also that moment where Jonna and Britt kiss, and you write something like, it was nowhere near as intimate as like the years they had spent together making music. So that I thought was so wonderful. And then also, just to your point, like how dramatic it was, every scene, it kind of reminded me of watching The Queen's Gambit. And I've never read the book, but I really want, I want to, because I wonder like how the chess scenes play out on the page, because you do such a good job of creating so much drama, like within, and I don't know classical music, but like I was like hanging on like every note and every beat, and there's so much drama that unfolds like throughout the course of one song or one concert, especially that scene, like it literally makes me weep, where Britt and Mal, before they're walking on stage, Daniel says something that Britt overhears that's very upsetting, and they're on stage kind of messing up the song, and she mouths something to him, and like several stanzas later he realizes that she is saying I love you, and he's realizing in what context, how she means it, and this all plays out like in the course of a song, which was just really incredible how much drama you infused into it. And like, so how did you pick the music, and like were those like anchors in the book, or did that kind of like come later?
It was very early on that I decided to organize the sections around a kind of program, because for me it was like I would be writing a section, and I was like, okay, I need to make a list of like the pieces that I know I want them to play, because I know the stories of these pieces. I know the story behind the Dvorak. I know I can write about it. I know about the Shostakovich. I know I can write about it. So I would make a little list at the top of the section, and I sent it to Laura, my editor, and that was when she was like, we could like make these be like little programs for the section, so that it's like you're sitting down to a concert, and this is what's going to be played. And so that's how we, organize those sections around, those pieces. And, what you were talking about is the physicality of it all is like, you do have to read. What makes it so intimate is you have to read these micro movements of people. And it's like, you spend your day looking at someone's face, or listening to them breathe, or watching them, the tiniest movement out of the corner of their eye, that is a super, super intimate. And those were these pieces that are in the book, those are the ones that I had really played a lot, and I knew how you would have to move. And the ones that I wasn't as familiar with, I would watch YouTube videos of quartets playing them, so that I could see how they would move. So I would know what kinds of movements the members of the group would have to anticipate, which was, sounds like really, really detailed, crazy work, but it was really, really fun, because, it is so physical. It's like choreographing a dance and just putting it on paper.
And I think this sounds silly, but I didn't realize how much, I don't know if improv is the right word, but how much you are responding to each other, and how much like one person can change the pace, and how it is this kind of like back and forth call song. And I think there was that moment early on with Fedorio, is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah.
Where Jonna says something like, he was a musician, and that like he committed into like every second the possibility that something could change. And I think each of the characters did that in a way too, this idea that there was something thrilling about not knowing how something was going to play out, or who you could be in that moment and the next moment, and how that could change.
Yeah, I mean, classical music is so alive. If you ever see it performed, I think people tend to think of it as like old and stodgy because it's written so long ago, but it's so alive if you see the right quartet play it, because it has to be made in the moment. Every second has to be made, and I think that that's like such a cool thing to do collaboratively. You know, like you do it if you're singing a song, and you do it if you're dancing, but like to have to do it in concert with three other people, I think is like extremely thrilling and not boring at all.
The other thing that we talked about yesterday that I thought was really interesting was how each of these characters navigated the decision whether to have children or not, and how parenthood shaped them each in different ways. And it wasn't these stereotypical ways or the ways that you might think each character. And I thought that was interesting, particularly with Henry, and the way that becoming a father changed him. And I think so. You had your daughter after you wrote the book, right? Or
I had my son 5 months ago.
5 months ago. Okay.
So way after, and you're right to pick up on that, because I was in this place when I was writing this book where I was like, how can you be a mother and an artist? I didn't know how to make it work. It didn't seem possible to me. And I think part of the writing the book for me was me trying to convince myself that it could work, you know, that it could actually, that both could work, right? That you could choose not to have children and be happy and live this fulfilled life. And also that you could have children and it could expand your artistic sense in some way. Like for Jana, even, you know, she adopts, it's for lack of a better word, softens her. Like it expands the softer part of her and makes her a better person and artist in that way. For Henry, it helps him realize there are other things in life that are satisfying besides this innate talent that he has. And for Britt and Daniel, they don't have to have children to have this like complete great love, which was also a lesson. So these were all lessons that I was like trying to convince myself, for like, it's okay whether you have children or not. Like, so it's a lot of self-talk there, but then, yeah, so that was, I don't know if that wasn't actually maybe the question you were asking, but that's kind of like where the interest in like, do these people have children or not came from.
No, and I love that. I could feel each of the characters working through that. And that was another moment that I loved towards the end with Daniel and Britt, where I think they're in bed and Daniel has this moment where he realizes that like both of these things are true, that there's room for children, but he knows that they're not going to have children. And he's like, that's okay. And he also, I think, articulates to Henry in an interesting way, where Henry has had this different experience than Jana. And I think Daniel says something to Henry like, your heart got bigger in here, your interior world, but your exterior world like shrunk a little. And that was, I think, something that he struggled with, but ultimately was what he wanted. So it was kind of beautiful to see them each come to these own realizations that maybe the paths they were on weren't easy, but they were the right ones.
Yeah. I really needed to hear that. And I'm glad I could give that to them. You know, a teacher of mine once said that short stories can end badly, you know, like they can end in a negative space, but novels often end in a happy space because you're there for so long that it feels almost unfair. And I felt that while I was in this book. It's like, these people have been through so much, like I have to get them to this point where even though all this stuff has happened to them, it's going to be okay. And because I think that's like just what I wanted to hear, you know, and so that was definitely like the impulse behind that ending as well.
Yeah, and I think you struck a balance between giving them the scene towards the end where Henry's leaving and like all chaos is breaking out in the ship is like so funny, and it's like it was hard for them in the end, and that I thought it was interesting that you move into this kind of like chorus section at the end, and one of the last passages, it's like you know, so Jana was like mean, like it was recounting that they all had these flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, you know, but we found it to be, if not pleasurable, alive. And I felt like for me, that was something that each of these characters wanted and that you gave to them, and that like they wanted to feel alive, they wanted to feel, they wanted to
Yeah.
create, and they each did that in some ways. And it didn't mean that their life was perfect or easy, but they had found a way to like build that together, which was so beautiful.
Yeah, that there's a difference between like, you know, 100% permanent happiness and also just like living a life that was like worth living, that those aren't necessarily the same thing. And probably like a thrilling, like alive life is going to be full of a lot of bad shit, you know? And so, yeah, that's definitely the case, is certainly with Brit, but with all of them to various degrees.
Yeah. And I think Daniel says to his parents at one point something like, there's more to being happy, like there's being free. And there was this, he definitely struggled with that, I think, more than other characters, but you're right, there was something more that they were all kind of searching for.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like making me, this is like a great on a personal level to talk to you about this book, because you're making me realize, you know, in the writing that I'm doing now, that I had written about art in this book, and I'm not writing about art in the second book really. And so that the answers maybe that I'm looking for, and like if I'm having trouble writing, are maybe in in the book that I already wrote, which is like about, you know, that it's kind of like okay to slog through stuff, like that it doesn't have to be like you know, super happy shiny all the time. And I think that like with writing especially, you can sometimes get bogged down in that idea that like it's got to be like perfect and like a shiny little pearl, and it doesn't.
Are you able to say anything about what you're writing next?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on my second novel, and it's about it's about a lot of things, but the easiest way to say it is it's about a marriage, it's about Marfa, Texas, it's about Japan, um, and it's got maybe like a tiny sort of, you know, future sci-fi, a dash of that in there. So it's like very different from what I did before in subject matter, but it's not, it feels like it's still sort of about like family love, um, in that way. Like this is more about friendship, the ensemble, but it's about connection and love in this book as well. And then I'm also working on TV stuff, and so it's sort of slow going with the book, but yeah,
That's so
that's what I'm doing.
exciting. I can't wait to read. And tell us what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about your other project and what you're doing in TV now.
I am, you know, I tried to turn the ensemble into a TV show, and it stalled out a little bit, but through that I sort of learned how to write for TV, and have been working on some shows here and there. And right now I'm on a show that I don't think I can say too much about, but it's an A24 show is what I can say, I guess. I'm in their offices, so that's I think that's what I'm allowed to say.
Okay, we won't hold you to it. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
And if you need someone to start a fan club on getting the TV show back up, I will lead that, because I would love to see
Yeah.
these characters in another way.
I
I
think
think
it's someday. Yeah, I think you're right. Like it just sort of has to be the right situation. But yeah, do you have
yeah.
any? Do you see anybody in mind for these characters are like?
Ooh, okay, maybe. Wow. I'm kind of getting like normal people vibes, like when I think
Yeah.
about like, the casting. So I could
Yes.
see like a Daisy Edgar Jones, like I could see Paul, like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know, but I have to think about that. That's a good question.
I
Have you
always
thought
think
of it
of
before?
it's hard, but I always think of Tom Holland when I think of Henry.
Okay,
Um,
I see that.
like a little like a Tom Holland vibe. But yeah, yeah, when Normal People came out was also sort of around the time that the book TV thing was sort of not going anywhere. And I was like, oh, we have these feelings here. Like, I'm good for now. I can watch Normal People over and over again.
I know, but now I need something else to watch.
I know. I think her next one is coming out on TV too, right? So
yeah, and her next book, I just started, it comes out September.
I'm so jealous you have a copy.
I know. I'm like, everyone's like, can you send it to me after? I'm like, I think I promised it to like 4 people at this point, but it's very challenging.
Yeah.
Well, it was so lovely to talk to you today. I really appreciate it. This is like truly one of my all-time favorites. I think I've reread like 2 books in the past 10 years, and this is one of them. And now I'm like, I want to reread this every summer because, yeah, it was incredible. Thank you.
I so appreciate that. That's like the point of writing a book, is the hopes that it becomes part of someone's life in the way that books became a part of my life, and they remind you of a season or they help you through a certain time in life. And so it's like so amazing to hear that it's a part of this time of your life. So I really, really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, thank you. And we will stay in touch, and everyone else stay on because I'm going to announce our July book.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye, Aja. So our July book is The View Was Exhausting. I hope everyone can see it because I love this cover. This is another old friend of mine from publishing. Seema is the editor on this book, and she's just on a publishing hot streak, and I'm so excited to be reading her authors for July. So this story is about a rising actress who gets paired up with, we'll say, a social it boy. In a term, her publicist is essentially trying to fix her reputation by creating this distraction, this romantic distraction in her life. And what initially starts as this fake romance surprise becomes something much more real and complicated. And you follow these characters over the course of several years as they are navigating their relationship. It is such a fabulous beach read. It's brilliantly and smartly written. It's a really interesting commentary, I think, on modern life and romance, and I think you all are going to love it. The authors, it's actually co-authors, their wives. I can't wait to ask them about how they write a book and be married at the same time, and they live in Berlin, which sounds fantastic. So I'm excited to talk to them. So starting July 1st, you can go to goop.com/goopbookclub, and you'll see all the info there about our July read. And I hope to see you back here at the end of July for our next talk. Thank you all, and sorry again about the tech difficulties. Thanks for bearing with us. Bye.